Hello and welcome everybody to the FGO and a Gacha guide. Are you wondering if you should spend your hard-earned Saint Quartz on the following servant? Then great, you're in the right place for the information. Today's topic servant is the sadistic ballerina Meltryllis. We will be covering all the points you see on screen, but before we get into those, fun fact with Melt, an interview a while back confirmed it was not Meltryllis, as was thought for a while, but Meltryllis because the flower she is related with is an amaryllis instead of a lilith. Interesting fact. Now let's head into my personal opinion on Melt. In my personal opinion, Melt is an amazing servant. She is quite good. She's one of the strongest servants in the game when it comes to challenge fights. She has survivability, very high damage output, good critical star production, great NP gain, and on top of all that, as an alter ego, Melt can easily beat all the cavalry classes, the berserkers, and the foreigners, meaning she has a lot of fights she is good for. Melt is easily my personal favorite servant to bust out when it comes to any challenge fight that doesn't involve one of the knight classes, that is a saber, an archer, or a lancer. Now let's go into why, starting with her stats. So, Meltryllis is an alter ego 5-star servant, meaning that she does 2 times bonus damage against foreigners, taking only half damage from foreigners, does 1.5 times damage against assassins, casters, riders, and berserkers, only does half damage against sabers, archers, and lancers, and alter egos have no weaknesses as of right now. There is nothing that is super effective against them. Until Kama comes out, she'll be literally the only one. Now, at level 90, she has 11,692 attack, which is about middling across 5-star servants. Her HP at 90 is 13,402, a little bit below average for a 5-star's health value. Moving on to her hidden stats, it shows that her NP gain per hit is 0.92%. This is very high. It is almost a full 1%, which is higher than the vast majority of servants out there. As for her cards, her quick card has 4 hits, her arts card has 2 hits, her buster card has 1 hit, and her extra card has 6 hits. Overall, these hit counts are a little bit low, aside from her quick cards and the extra card having a 6 hit, which is a little higher than usual. Her star weight, aka how easy it is to get stars on her cards instead of another servant's, is at 100, which is pretty average across all servants, but it is healthily above caster class servants, so if you have 2 caster supports, she should be getting the bulk of the critical stars. Her star creation rate is 10.2%, also around the average. Overall, her stats come out to be a little bit above average, mainly due to how incredibly high her MP gain on hit is, and the fact that she actually has a decent hit count on at least her quick cards and her extra cards to help make use of that. Now let's take a look at the deck and the NP. Again, her deck has 2 quick cards, 1 arts card, and 2 buster cards, which is a non-standard 2-1-2 deck, sacrificing a arts card for a quick card. Her Noble Phantasm, Sarasvati Meltout, is a single-target quick Noble Phantasm with 8 hits. It does damage to one enemy, removes their buffs after dealing damage, and increases her own quick performance between 10 and 30% based on her overcharge, again after dealing damage. This is honestly a somewhat weak NP due to the fact that the buff removal and quick buff come after damage is dealt. I do hope someday they'll bring this MP up to parity with other Noble Phantasms out there and make those effects apply before damage. Honestly, Melt doesn't necessarily need any buffs. This will still do a lot of damage because Melt does a lot of damage. But if you want to compare it to, say, Abigail's, which removes buffs before damage, or plenty of servants that buff their cards before dealing damage, Melt having them both come after damage really feels a little bit weak. Next up is her passives, and she has a bunch. First off, we have Magic Resistance B, giving her 17.5% bonus debuff resistance passively. Then we have Riding B, increasing her own quick performance by 8% more. Independent Action A, increasing her own critical damage by 10%. Goddess Essence B, increasing her own damage by 225 as a base, and increasing her own debuff resist even further by 22.5%. Meaning that altogether she is gaining 40% extra debuff resistance passively, which is actually going to make a difference. Usually I say these don't matter at all because 17.5 is basically nothing, but 40% is quite hefty. That's going to make her resist quite a few debuffs over the course of the fights. Now, the good things are riding and independent action, obviously, because those affect her NP when it comes to riding, and Melt is very good at producing stars, especially if she can get a Noble Phantasm off in order to make use of that critical damage up. Now, let's move on to her skills. First off, we have Crime Ballet. This gives her evasion for 2 attacks, which lasts for 3 turns, and gives her, on that turn that it's used, critical stars between 5 and 15 based on level. This is a pretty simple move. It is protection from arrows, but with stars added on it, or if you want to call it instinct, but with evasion tacked on. Either way, it is a good skill. The evasion lasting for 2 attacks is pretty darn helpful. It gives her a lot of longevity and survivability when it comes to those more difficult fights. And the extra stars, while not the best in the world, they're pretty nice on Melt due to the fact that she has a pretty good crit damage up on her, which we'll see in just a moment, along with independent action. Next, we have Sadistic Constitution. This increases her own attack for 3 turns between 10 and 30%, and has a 500% chance to reduce her own defense by 10% for 3 turns. The reason it's a 500% chance is so that all that passive debuff resistance isn't going to let her resist it. Now, at a base, this is honestly pretty darn weak. This debuff makes no sense for a simple 30% attack up. There are plenty of attack ups that go even higher than that with no demerits, I meant to say. However, it does have a strengthening, and this strengthening is quite strong. What this strengthening does is it gives her a buff which works as follows. Every time Melt attacks, she will gain a 15% critical damage up for 3 turns. And this will stack every time she attacks. Every single attack gives this buff. Which means if you were to, say, combine Melt with Summer BB, lock her cards in, and you have 3 Melt cards, you can easily reach over 100% critical damage up for Melt and make her critical hits do extremely high damage. This is honestly one of the better self-buff skills in the game because of how insane this gets very quickly. At just using 3 cards, that is 3 instances of that buff, plus the 1 extra for 4 instances of that buff. 4 instances of that buff is 60% critical damage up for 3 turns. That's a really strong skill, as long as you use it when Melt has cards. Now, moving on to her 3rd skill and final skill, Melt Virus. This reduces all enemies' MP damage by 20 to 50% for 1 turn based on your level, reduces all allies' NP damage by 50% for the turn it's used, has a 500% chance to grant a self-delayed buff for 1 turn, and that buff increases her own MP damage by 20% for 1 turn after the 1 turn delay. Alright. At a base, this skill sucks. However, there is a strengthening to help it out. Thank goodness. And the strengthening is as follows. The NP damage buff to herself is now 20 to 30% based on level. The buff no longer has a 1-turn delay. It is instantly applied to her, and it lasts for 2 turns. That is so much better. That is much, much, much better, because not only are you lowering the chance of chaining NPs with any other attacker with her, but for it to have a 1-turn delay, that can really screw you over in case an enemy has an MP drain or an MP seal or anything like that. With the strengthening, you actually get to use your MP on the turn you want to, And Melt can oftentimes regain enough MP charge from follow-up attacks that she can just loop the next turn over, especially if she has Scotty's help with her, which makes Melt a great candidate for 3-turn clearing challenge fights. So, what materials do we need to level these skills? Well, Melt being an alter ego means it's actually not that bad. It's actually pretty darn simple to level her stuff up, because all the way up through level 6, all you take are skill gems from 2 different classes. Afterwards, you are going to need some materials. They're all gold rarity materials, but they're in low quantities. We need 5 Warhorse Horns, 5 Primordial Lanugos, 9 Dragon's Reverse Scales, and 9 Scarabs of Wisdoms, which means to max her out in terms of just materials, we need 15 Horns, 15 Lanugos, 27 Dragon Scales, and 27 Scarabs, which is pretty darn cheap overall. That's not bad. That's pretty easy to come by, all things considered. I know they're all gold materials, but most events give out at least 10 of these at a time, and with just a couple of those, you will easily be able to max her out. So how does Melt stack up to her competition? Well, as a single target 5-star alter ego, her only direct competition is Shitanai. She is the only other single target 5-star alter ego. So Shitanai is overall better at slower, more defensive fights as an art servant, and she has some more defensive abilities overall. So while she's better at that, Melt is better at dishing out really fast damage and having a more offensive focused fight. I personally think Melt is overall better due to how much damage she can consistently dish out, and the fact that she can oftentimes just 3-turn clear those more difficult fights that you would be wanting to use her for. Now, you can also compare Melt to basically any single target damage dealer that's a rider, assassin, or caster as well, because those are all the classes that she's going to be targeting, in general at least. She doesn't outclass every single one of them, especially when it comes to certain niche targets that some of them may have. But Melt is going to be probably top 10 across all of those servants. She's definitely a very top tier servant, and there's going to be a lot of difficulty trying to outdo her for most servants out there. Now, if you do roll for Melt, what skill should you prioritize in leveling? I would suggest her second skill first, as it is a large damage increase. It scales rather well, and once you have that strengthening, it is a massive critical up, and helps her deal out incredibly heavy damage if she hits a crit. Then I would suggest her third skill next. While at the end of the day, her third skill is just kind of an NP boost for 2 turns, the NP boost itself is rather strong, and it can easily allow her to 1-turn a break bar that you might not have done without the buff. And last but not least, her first skill can be saved for last. The only things that scale on it are the star creation and the cooldown. The cooldown being lowered is the really big thing, because when the cooldown is as low as possible, it means that you have the evasion up as often as possible. You can't have it up 100% of the time, but you can have it up about 75 to 80% of the time with some luck. And the stars are nice, they're alright, but really getting that evasion up is the big thing. Now, let's move on to craft essences to equip her with. Melt is a single target quick damage dealer who also does very high critical damage, so I think focusing on those kinds of things. First off, the best event CE for her is, well, the event CE you get from her event, One Summer. So, what a perfect setup. This increases her quick performance by 10%, increases her MP damage by 10%, and starts her with a 50% charged MP gauge, allowing her to quickly get into her first NP loop. Now, if you aren't looking for fast MPs, you can take Midsummer Moment if you have it. This gives a 10 or 15% max limit broken quick performance increase, a 10 or 15% critical damage up, and produces 4 stars every turn. This focuses a little bit less on that NP damage and a lot more at consistent critical hits with high damage, especially if it provides a few stars each turn. and if you combine it with, say, a support with a fragment of 2030 or 2, and then you've got a bunch of extra stars to work with. Next up, we have 3 Anglers. 3 Anglers is an event CE from the last Halloween, as of this recording at least. This increases quick performance by 15%, increases MP damage by 15%, and increases critical damage by 15%. A little bit of everything that Melt wants, at the sacrifice of a starting MP charge. And finally, when you just need to hit really, really hard with your MP, there is, of course, the Black Grail. This is always the premier CE for this. It gives you a 60% or 80% when max limit broken increased MP damage at all times at the cost of just a measly 500 HP a turn. It's basically free. But that one is a Gacha CE, and I can understand if people don't have it. Now let's talk about what servants to group Melt with. Oh look, it's Waver. Hi Waver, you made the cut. He provides 50% MP charge, crit damage up, which Melt loves, defense up, and attack up. Hard to pass on him. Next up, we have the premier quick supporter, best quick supporter in the game, and oftentimes best servant to choose to pair with Melt, Scotty. She provides 50% quick up with 100% quick crit damage up for 3 turns, a 50% ally MP charge, and 30% defense and crit chance down for all enemies. She's perfect for supporting a servant like Melt, helps Melt to loop a lot easier, and helps Melt to even provide a lot of stars for herself with those massive crit up, or quick ups, not crit ups. Next up, we have her mom in a swimsuit with a tan, Summer BB. Her third skill allows you to lock in the cards that you've drawn for 3 turns. Summer BB is really good for helping set up a 3-turn clear. So if you are on your first turn, you see 3 Melt cards, you just throw your buffs on, swap Summer BB in, pop her third skill, and for the next 3 turns, Melt go burr. It'll allow her to gain a lot of MP, use very high critical damage increase with her strengthened second skill, and just absolutely tear through whatever enemy happens to be in her way. And finally, we have Merlin. Merlin honestly does pretty much everything that Melt wants, except for a quick buff. His MP provides star generation, MP generation, and healing if you can't 3-turn the enemy, and the fight's going to be a little bit longer. On top of that, his skill Hero Creation, which gives a 50% buster up, is really nice for her because it still gives a 100% critical damage boost for 1 turn, which Melt can easily make great use of considering she creates stars so well. So, too long didn't watch here. Melt's a great servant to roll for. She's one of the stronger single-target servants out there. She is great at challenge fights due to her consistently high damage output. When combined with Double Scotty, she can 3-turn a lot of the more difficult challenge fights with little to no trouble. I should know, I've done it with her. Her class gives her very high damage output against a large variety of opponents, so she's very flexible. And if you really need another reason to roll for her, well, like I said, she's very flexible. Artwork by Shiki on Pixiv. S-I-K-I on Pixiv if you wish to see more. If you watched this video and enjoyed it, check out my Twitch channel. Give me a follow and a like and subscribe and money and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see ya next time.